All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So thanks again for joining me today. My name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar, and thanks for joining me for CUI and Policies, the foundation of CMMC Compliance. So today's session is going to spend quite a bit of time doing a demonstration and a walkthrough of Exostar's Policy Pro SaaS solution. If you'd like to follow along while we do that, you've got some time while I cover some introductory material and some housekeeping details. So if you'd like to, you can follow that link that you see below and start a free trial and follow along with David as he presents the application. Or of course, you can go ahead and start that at any time. A few housekeeping details before we start with the formal presentation. So today's session is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, you will be muted during today's session, but a number of you submitted questions prior to today's session when you registered, and those are the questions we'll be answering today. If for some reason we do have an outage, just wait for a minute and try to refresh the page. You can also use that login that you receive via email to come back into the session at any time. This session is being recorded. It'll be available on demand via the Exostar resource library. That can be found at www.exostar.com/resources anytime after the event. We also have a YouTube page where this will be posted. Additionally, you will be receiving a copy of the slides and a link to the presentation as a follow-up to today's session as well. If after today's session you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts, you can reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com via email, or you can use the chat feature that's available from our website, www.exostar.com. And there's a chat feature there on every page, so we'll be happy to answer your questions via that medium as well. So again, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar, and I'm joined by David Rowe. David, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is David Rowe. I'm the Business Development Manager here at ISMS and happy to show the platform and how it can help you with your CMMC journey.
Thanks, David. So before I turn it over to David for the demonstration, I just want to kind of level set everybody where we are in the CMMC rulemaking process. Then also cover what you need to do today. I'll also then cover just a quick scoping guide of how you want to think about your organization as it applies to CMMC. So with that, where we are in the CMMC rulemaking process. So the 32 CFR, that's the Code of Federal Regulations, that pertains to CMMC, went into effect on December 16th, 2024. Now, that particular rule was the one that allowed the CMMC program to begin. What that meant is that people can start to schedule C3PAOs to come and do their assessments. It put in place the CMMC scoping guides and assessment guides, put together, re-emphasize that the Cyber AB is the implementation body for the CMMC program, et cetera. So it kind of formalized and it put that into the federal regulations. The one thing we're still waiting for is 48 CFR, which was a proposed rule on 115. And what that rule is the one that will actually allow CMMC to be put into the DoD contract. So we're still waiting on that part of the rule to finalize. Now, what the CMMC rule does is it moves us away from us allowing to self-attest that we are NIST 800-171 compliant if we receive controlled unclassified information. It moves us from that self-attestation model to a third-party assessment model. It also did define a couple key terms that have been rolling around the industry for quite a while. One of those is what's called a CSP, or a cloud service provider. Those are folks who provide a SaaS solution that may help you achieve your CMMC compliance. Those solutions need to be FedRAMP moderate. The other term that it formalized and gave definitions around is those of what's called an external service provider. These are organizations that, again, may augment staff or help you in your CMMC journey. They may manage a cloud service for you. They may be augmenting your IT organization. They may act as an outsourced IT organization, etc. Now, those folks absolutely allowed, and they're going to be assessed as part of your organization's overall system security plan. They themselves don't have to be at a particular CMMC level as an organization, but they may choose to be. And the regulations basically say, we'll let the market determine where that has to be. So with that said, right, obviously we've had a change of administration. There's been a lot going on in Washington and around federal regulations and rules. There was a regulatory freeze put in place as one of the presidential executive orders that went out. What that mostly will affect, we think, is that it may very well delay the CMMC implementation, but the majority of the industry does not expect it to stop it. CMMC was a priority during the first Trump administration. One of the key leaders within that CMMC movement of the Trump administration, a woman named Katie Arrington, she's come back into the administration as a CISO in the Department of Defense. So it is fully expected to continue on down the route of being implemented. But as I said, it may delay that 48 CFR as that gets reviewed as well. But we still fully expect it to be put in place sometime in 2025. And so just kind of a reminder of what CMMC is. What this does is it breaks it down into 3 levels, right? Level 1 is for those organizations that, as part of your contract, you do not receive controlled unclassified information. You only receive contract information. So as part of receiving that FCI, you're going to be required to meet 15 requirements. Those are laid out in Federal Acquisition Regulation 52204-21. You're going to have to annually do a self-assessment and annually affirm that you do these things. Level 2 and level 3 is when we start to see that your organization receives controlled unclassified information as part of this contract. And if you do, you're going to have to comply with NIST 800-171 R2. If you're at that level and you're at level 2, you're going to be in one of 2 categories. The smaller of those categories will be allowed to do self-assessments, and you'll have to do a self-assessment of your compliance, and you'll attest that you do those things. Now, that's going to be a very small portion of contracts, and the contracting officer is going to make that determination. The others of you who fall in this category, and your contracts will spell out that you need to go to a C3PAO, certified third-party assessment organization, once every 3 years, and have them assess how you are implementing those NIST 800-171 controls, validate that you're actually doing those things, and get that assessment. You'll need to annually affirm that you're continuing to do these things. And again, that third-party assessment will have to be done once every 3 years. Now, a small portion of organizations out there receive controlled unclassified information in a high category. Those organizations will have additional controls that you'll need to have implemented. There's 134 requirements around that, 110 from NIST 800-171, and then 24 from NIST 800-172. You'll also have a third-party assessment once every 3 years, but that assessment organization will be from DIBCAC, which is the Defense Industrial Bases certified assessment organization that's part of the Department of Defense. All these categories, you're going to have a senior company officially affirm once every year. And if you're in that NIST 800-171 assessment category, if an assessor does come on site and finds that you haven't got a particular control in place, that's okay. You'll be able to open a POAM against that. That's a plan of action and milestones. But only certain controls are allowed to be open. And then if those controls are open, you'll have 180 days to close those. Now, when CMMC does take effect, and that's when it actually starts to appear in contracts, there is an implementation phase spelled out. It's a 3-year implementation phase. That first year, so right, if it goes into effect in 2025, so 2025 to 2026, there'll be a 1-year implementation window where we're kind of where we are today, where solicitations are going to require a self-assessment. Then after that first 12 months, that's when we'll start to see those third-party assessments be required at level 2. And then after that year, so 24 months after phase 1, that's where we're also going to start to include that level 3 certification. Then after 3 years, we'll start full implementation of the program. Now, just keep in mind, the DoD does reserve the right to implement additional controls sooner. So you may see some contracts start to have the third-party assessment in phase 1, or the level 3 certifications in phase 2. The DoD may advance those for particular programs. It's really up to them. Now, if you have DoD contracts today, I would encourage you to take a look at those. Make sure you understand the DFARS clauses that you have in place, and make sure you're in compliance with those. If you've got that 252.204-7012 clause in your contract, you're already required to be compliant with NIST 800-171. That's what that clause says. That if I receive controlled unclassified information, I secure it in accordance with NIST 800-171, and you yearly affirm that you do those things. If you've got 7019 as one of your clauses, that kind of steps up the bar a little bit, in that it, as part of your annual self-assessment, you're actually supposed to score yourself. Excuse me. There's an assessment guide, NIST 800-171 Alpha, that has a scoring system as part of it that tells you how to score yourself on each of the individual 110 controls. So your score will range somewhere from a -110, or I'm sorry, a -203 to a +110. You then take that score and you enter it into the Supplier Performance Risk System. That's the SPRS system that's run by the DoD. They're the only ones that have access to it. And they take that score as part of your overall risk assessment as a vendor to the Department of Defense. It's just one measure in that overall risk assessment, but it is a measure. Now, as you start to think about NIST 800-171 and those 110 controls, and this is really only for those organizations out there who are receiving controlled unclassified information. Excuse me. One of the things to remember is that this is all about the system that is storing, processing, or transmitting controlled unclassified information, and the individuals in that system that are doing those things. So excuse me, it behooves you to understand how CUI enters into your organization, where it travels, who in your organization works with it, and that may be just that they use it to flesh out a proposal. They use it to determine what your actions are going to be in fulfillment of that contract, etc. But where are those things and those people that store, process, or transmit? What happens with that CUI when the contract ends? So understand that overall flow of data so you understand the scope of your network, because that's what this is going to come down to, because you're going to develop a system security plan. And that system security plan is defined by where controlled unclassified information is stored, processed, or transmitted in your organization. And you can have an approach that includes your whole organization or a portion of it. That portion is typically called an enclave, and it includes then all those parts that do it. When you start to build the system security plan, think about those different places where the information is stored or processed, which responsible individuals are part of that, not only the people who actually do the work within the data itself, but you may also want to consider the IT organization that may have access to that information. They may not work in it, they may not actually do anything with it, but they may have access to the files themselves. They may be the admins of the systems, etc. So you'll want to do an inventory of the systems that do that, and those could be third-party systems. They could be cloud services that you're utilizing to store this information in. You should understand that those cloud services should be FedRAMP or they should be in the FedRAMP marketplace. If there are third parties that are part of that management of that software or as your organization, those are the folks that you may want to think about how you want to ensure that they're integrated into your system security plan. And those third parties will typically have something like a shared responsibility matrix that shows you what they do versus what you need to cover as part of your overall system security plan, etc. And then you want to diagram that system out, because when you ask for those third-party assessors to come on site and to do that assessment, they're going to ask you, okay, what is the scope of the system that I'm taking a look at? And they're going to default to what you tell them. So if you can shrink that boundary and scope that system, as tightly as possible, you're going to not restrict, but you're going to limit what they're going to be assessing. But you'll want to make sure that it encompasses all of those things that include your cloud service providers, your external service providers, those things that don't necessarily store, process, or transmit the information, but they protect it, like firewalls, physical doors and locks, and those kinds of things. Do you have specialized assets like IoT or machinery that might that don't necessarily store or process, or they may have some other limitations that don't allow them to be secured in particular ways, and you may have to put some mitigation around those. You may have things that are just that might be viewable or just outside the boundary that are out of scope, and you want to define those things for the assessor doesn't take those into consideration when they're doing their assessment. And for all these things, you're going to want to build the policies and procedures wrapped around those 14 control families and those 110 individual controls that make up the NIST 800-171. And what David's going to show you in just a minute when he goes through the demonstration is how Policy Pro can help your organization take the templates that are provided for you, customize those to fit your organization, put those through an a scoring engine that tell you, how are you doing and what can I do to improve these things? How to make sure that your organization can then review those periodically because that's also part of the controls. This is a SaaS service, will change over time as NIST 800-171 changes over time. This is a cloud-based SaaS solution, and you can then provide access to your users into it and work within that system itself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David to show you how this actually works.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, so as Kevin said, policies are going to be the foundation of your organization's cybersecurity and will be able to help you actually protect that CUI. And so without those policies in place, it's going to be hard to show those third-party assessors exactly what it is you're doing to implement those 110 controls associated with those 14 policy families. Exostar's Policy Pro is a SaaS-based solution to help you with that journey and that process of actually getting compliant around those various requirements that you face as you do business with DoD, either directly or indirectly as subcontractors. Regardless of where your organization is in your cybersecurity journey, maybe you're just getting started out with your CMMC program and you are really unsure of where to begin. I'd recommend taking a look at the trial of Policy Pro and see exactly what sort of policies your organization is going to need to start creating in order to actually meet those requirements of NIST 800-171 and the upcoming CMMC standard, which assesses those 800-171 controls. Maybe your organization is further along and you already have all of your existing policies in place. It's definitely a great place to be, but you want to ensure that you're covering everything you need to cover. And we'll talk about how you can utilize the features of the tool in order to assess against all of those controls that are required. We'll start off using our policy builder tool, and this is really the first step that you should start with, especially if you don't have those policies or you don't have all of those policies in place. The first time through on the platform, you'll receive this pop-up here, which is a brief explanation of what policies are, as well as some of their documents that you should have either already or will need to create. For example, the gap assessment, risk register, the POAM, which is that plan of actions and milestones, as well as the SSP, which is your system security plan that Kevin mentioned previously. If you don't have any of those documents, you can download a sample template here from the platform, but they are pretty basic. So if you need some further assistance on generating your POAMs and your SSPs, you can take a look at the Companion Product Certification Assistant, which is also part of a bundle suites that Kevin will talk about a little bit after this demo. Moving on to the policies themselves, we'll start off with a level 2 example of CMMC, which contains the 14 policy family domains and the 110 controls. And once you've selected a family, let's say access control here, you'll be taken to the prepare, gather, and consult page. This is everything you're going to need to prepare prior to even getting started with the policies themselves. For example, it could include things like gathering your organization's documents, records, and other materials related to these various access control topics. Additionally, who you may want to consult with, whether they are internal or external stakeholders. For example, it can include people like your network administrator, head of IT, or CISO, and then any sort of outside contractor if applicable. So those are going to be your external service providers, which include people like your MSPs, MSSPs, and IT consultants. Once you're ready with that, you'll then go to our policy template. And all of our policy templates are broken out into a couple different sections. We've got the header here, which includes your organization name, the department or departments this policy falls under, the issue date for when you finalized, approved by, and the tracking number. The tracking number can be used in a number of ways. However, as you work on revisions and updates to your policies, you'll update that tracking number accordingly with the version number of that policy. The other sections include the purpose, the scope, and the individual practices. And so the bulk of your work is going to be done customizing these policy templates on an individual practice by practice basis. There's a couple of key pieces of information here. You see the practice ID number. In this case, it's access control 3.1.1. Next to that is going to be the practice description, limiting information system access. And then finally underneath that are going to be the guidelines. The guidelines will help you understand what sort of information is typically included in that particular practice, as well as in plain English, kind of explain what that particular practice is about. Once you're ready to begin, you'll click on this pencil icon located here on the right-hand side, and that's going to bring up the policy template for 3.1.1. We can see that this particular policy is going to be about our organization's account creation, work from home, and bring your own device policy. A couple notes as you're working through these policy templates. One, ensure you're reading through the entirety of the policy because what's written here should reflect what your organization has actually implemented or what your organization plans to implement in the future based off your future policies. So definitely make sure to review these templates carefully and modify it and customize it to fit your implementations. The second part is there's certain areas where you want to pay particular attention to as you're working on these policy templates, and we'll walk through an example here together in the first paragraph, where it says all account creations will be submitted by the requesting department manager to the IT support email address for completion using the account request ticketing system or other process. So there, if you are utilizing a ticketing system to handle those account creation requests, then that's what you want to fill in, whatever system it is. And if you are not using a ticketing system, then just fill in whatever other process it is you're utilizing to actually handle that particular aspect of, of your account creation policies. If it's been a while since you've taken a look at Policy Pro, we've made a number of enhancements recently to increase the collaboration and productivity of policy building, including comments and mentions. So as you add those relevant stakeholders into the platform, whether they're ESPs, external ESPs, or they are internal employees, you'll be able to add them as users and comment and mention particular aspects of the policy, as well as a number of other enhancements to the productivity that we won't cover in today's demo. Once you've saved any changes you wish to make, that's going to timestamp it as well as who the user was that last made that change. And any changes will be added into version history, which is a new feature as well. So this will keep track of all of your revisions and updates, and all of your past policies and policy versions will be stored here in version history. So this is a great way to show evidence that you are periodically reviewing and updating your policies, which again is a requirement of the NIST 800-171. Once you've done this process and gone through all of the practices and the other sections as well, you're going to click this export button here on the bottom. And that's going to do a couple things. It's going to combine all of those sections I mentioned previously, so the header, purpose, the scope, and the individual practices, into a single access control document. It's then going to be saved and downloaded to your local drive. So you'll have a hard copy of your access control policy. It's also an important final step prior to moving on to the next feature of the platform, which is going to be policy assessment. Policy assessment is where you'll come to analyze and assess your documentation. And as I mentioned previously in the demo, this is also where you can come to maybe as your first step if you already have all of your existing policies in place. So we'll go ahead and upload a document here together. And there's a couple different ways you can upload your documentation. Again, it can either be a document created using our template or any existing documentation that you might have. And also, there's another possibility of maybe you don't have a complete access control policy that's kind of laid out for NIST 800-171, but you have some generic policies that are related to access control. For example, maybe you have an acceptable use policy or an account creation policy, maybe a password policy. All of those things can be uploaded and scored together as a single document, and you'll see exactly kind of where your existing documentation stands in relation to NIST and CMMC. Once you submitted that document or documents, you'll receive this assessment and you'll click on this detail scorecard to bring up this pop-up. We assess your documentation in a couple of different ways, both at a high level as well as a granular level. At the high level, the overall assessment, which for this document appears relevant in size, scope, and organizational customization. The overall assessment is comprised of three different metrics: the relevance, the model similarity, and the word count. The relevance is how many key terms or phrases are included in your documents. The higher that is, the higher the relevance and therefore overall assessment will be. The model similarity compares the policy you've uploaded to our model documents, and we do that for two reasons. One, to ensure it's been appropriately customized to fit your organization and your organization's implementations, as well as ensuring it's covering everything it needs to cover. Finally, the word count is simply to ensure that we have enough context surrounding those key terms to accurately assess your document. If you see that word count as too short, chances are the overall assessment and overall score might not necessarily be an accurate reflection of how your policies are doing. In terms of the overall score, here you can see it's 70.7%, but our overall scoring is not like an academic score, meaning 90% as an A, 80% as a B. Our overall scoring is a relevance scoring system, meaning anything above a 50% shows a relevant document. And we'll talk further on a little bit later in the demo about how you can use the overall score in conjunction with the other metrics to gauge how your policy is currently doing, as well as how your policies are doing over time. So that's the kind of assessment at a high level, but we also provide some granular feedback as well in terms of exactly what is it that your policies are missing, and how can you improve those gaps that are existing in your documentation. And we do that through our key elements not included, or KENI for short. We have two different types of KENIs: control KENIs as well as general policy KENI terms. My first example here is CUI, non-public information. That is that key term that's missing in my document that I should be looking to incorporate. And we provide some additional information underneath that, which is the actual practice that it's associated with. In this case, it's 3.1.22. And for simplicity's sake, we actually provide you the discussion requirements directly from the NIST. So if you're unsure exactly what this particular practice is about, you don't have to flip back and forth between the platform and the standard trying to figure out exactly what that's stating and what that's discussing. The documents for examination are going to be other sorts of documents, records, and materials that your organization might have that can help you address that particular control, KENI. Additionally, after you've incorporated it into your policies and after you've actually implemented them, these documents for examination can also be used as a list of evidence, a list of artifacts that you can use to prove that you've actually implemented that particular control. So some examples of that for this case might be a security plan or maybe a system audit log. Again, whatever documentation that supplements and addresses that particular control key. General policy key terms are very similar in the sense that they're also key terms and phrases that are missing in my document. However, you'll notice there's no collapse all, expand all button. And the reason for that is these general policy key terms are not tied to specific practice like the ones above. They're more generic to the policy domain, in this case, an access control policy. You can also export these results into a PDF if you want to save it to your local drive and share it with others who aren't on the platform. One last feature I want to talk about here in policy assessment is this management approval. So I'll go ahead and select management approved here, and we can discuss it further in the dashboard. The dashboard is where you'll come to see all your progress and work throughout the platform, whether you're creating policies in Policy Builder or assessing policies in Policy Assessment. All of that work's going to be reflected here. Additionally, you'll be able to utilize the management approval to see and keep track of which policy is your most up-to-date and management approved policy, and also be able to use the platform for both internal and external audits, showing that evidence that you are actually doing the things that you are stating you're doing, and using your senior officials to, or whoever is in charge of your CMMC compliance, and prove that you've actually gone ahead and approved of these policies. So it'll timestamp it as well as who the user was that last approved that particular policy. And the process will be incorporating those keys into your policy. And as you incorporate it, you'll notice that your number of keys will go down, your overall score will be going up, and and you'll use that overall scoring to gauge how your policies are doing over time. And once you've incorporated all of those keys into your policy, you know that you're addressing all of those gaps that are going to be required for your CMMC audit in the future. If at any time throughout this process you need some additional guidance or resources, you can always come to our reference library, which contains various links and resources across the web, mostly directly from the NIST Institute, but it's a great way to ensure that you're getting the most up-to-date and relevant information about a particular topic. So if one of your keys was related to VPNs and you're unsure how to address it, you can come here to the reference library and select the appropriate link. Everything in today's demo was done for level 2. However, we also have level 1 available on the platform as well. So if you select that level 1 button here, that'll switch the policies to the 6 policy family domains and the 15 practices associated with the level 1 controls or level 1 policy domains. So hopefully that's been a helpful overview about how to utilize Policy Pro to actually build out your policies and then assess those policies and then and incorporate those keys into your documentation. Once you've done that, you can reassess it as many times as necessary until you've addressed all of those gaps in your documentation. This is the best way to ensure that your organization is ready for those CMMC audits and ensure that not just for CMMC, but that you're actually compliant with the requirements and regulations that are required today, which is the NIST 800-171. We do have a free trial to the platform, which you can find on exostar.com. But thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Kevin now to finish out this webinar.
Great, thanks, David. All right, everybody, let me just flip back here. So as David mentioned during his presentation, Policy Pro is part of Exostar's CMMC Ready suite. This includes the Companion Application Certification Assistant, which is an application where you really manage that overall CMMC program. It allows you to put in the information about your overall system. So put in that data flow diagram, that network diagram, who in your organization are the different people involved, allows you to define and bring in those policy libraries that you keep in Policy Pro, bring them into each of those individual controls, and then walk through those individual controls to put in your policies, your implementation statements, the evidence of how you actually do those things. Asks you those determine if questions so you know that you're actually fulfilling the requirements of that particular control. If you haven't implemented a particular control, it allows you to open a POAM against that, assign that to somebody in your organization, and manage that POAM to closure. Then it'll gather that information again in the one application. So when you're ready to engage with that third party, you have all that information at hand when that assessment organization comes on board. If you're looking for a solution to store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information and you're looking to do an enclave approach, Exostar has our managed Microsoft 365 for CMMC. This is a Teams environment stood up in Microsoft's Azure GCC High that Exostar manages as an MSP on your behalf. That includes an application within it that puts the guardrails in that Teams application to put in things like least privileged access control. So people only get access to the environment once you invite them. They only get access to teams to which you've been explicitly invited into. It allows you to bring in third parties into this same environment and work again with them in a secure manner. We also then have a number of partners that can do those various kinds of CMMC assessments you may want. We have folks who can do readiness assessments to see if you are actually ready to go to that third party, or mock assessments if you want to see how you'll do. We have folks that'll come in and do gap assessments, and these are all third parties that would engage with you and in those Exostar applications to ensure that you're all putting them in the same format. They understand those Exostar tools and can work with you to make sure you're ready to receive that CMMC assessment. Now, as I mentioned, we got a few questions in. I think I got 6 of them in before today's session. So I'm going to go ahead and answer those. So the first one we got, if a company meets NIST 800-171, does that align with being CMMC 2? Who decides if a company needs to self-assess or have a C3PAO assess? So for the first part of this question, the answer is yes, right? CMMC level 2 lines up with NIST 800-171. So if you're level 2, if you're CMMC 2, right, and the CMMC 2 is the version of CMMC, right? Level 2 is what level you aspire to as an organization. And if you're level 2, you need to comply with the 110 controls of NIST 800-171. If you sign a contract with the Department of Defense, that contract will tell you whether or not you need to self-assess or whether or not you need that third-party assessment organization. And the contracting officers are going to be the ones who make that determination on a contract-by-contract basis. So, when you go to, your source of contracts and you look for what current proposals are out there, what do I want to respond to, etc., those DFARS clauses will be included as part of that contract, and you'll bid accordingly. And those ones should tell you which of those are going to require either a third-party assessment or which ones will allow you to self-attest. So we get number 2 quite a bit about, are there any foreign control measures that are reciprocal, or do they have other civilian agencies that have the same compliance requirement? On the first one, currently the U.S. Department of Defense doesn't have any reciprocal agreements with other Ministry of Defenses or other defense departments, allied countries, etc. So if you've got a contract with the U.S. Department of Defense, whether or not you're a foreign-owned company, foreign entity, etc., you're going to need to comply with CMMC. so that's the current standing. So I'll just leave that at that. We are starting to see in a number of other federal agencies, they are also starting to require, if you receive controlled unclassified information as part of their contracts, you need to be compliant with NIST 800-171. The DoD is the only one that has the CMMC program in place, but the NIST 800-171 requirement for controlling or for safeguarding controlled unclassified information is part of other agency requirements as well. You see this in NASA, you see this in the Department of Homeland Security, etc. So number 3, since CUI is unclassified, why is NIST 800-171 not sufficient to protect it? So the first part of this question is, it is. So NIST 800-171 is the federal requirements, or well, so NIST, right, National Institute of Standards 800-171 is the regulations that safeguard controlled unclassified information. So these are the controls in place if you have controlled unclassified information in non-federal systems. So, your company, you receive it, it's gone out of the federal government, you're now in control of it. This is how you need to safeguard it. So that is absolutely sufficient, right? And that's the rule. CMMC program, the second part of this question, so why implement a CMMC program, is because the 7012 requirement, which was the one that said, hey, if I receive controlled unclassified information, I've got to protect it in accordance with NIST 800-171, has been around since 2013. In that time, the DoD via its DIBCAC organization and federal and various False Claims Act has determined that the industry hasn't done a great job at actually doing what they say they're doing, right? We've all self-attested that we've done this. Some organizations haven't. Some organizations, when they score themselves, say, well, I've done these things. Another organization or DIBCAC has come out and said, well, we scored you and it was much lower. Our score was much lower than yours. So, you need to fix these things. So because of those, those differences, and that's why we've come to the current state where they're going to start to require the third-party assessments. Now, before I jump into the last 3 questions, this slide will be included in the deck, and as I mentioned, you'll receive this presentation as part of our follow-up to today's session. This has a number of links to important information that'll help you. It also includes that link to the free trial for Policy Pro. We do these webinars throughout the month. We have 3 that are wrapped around our different products, and then we have 1 general CMMC webinar every month. So the last 3 questions. So does this apply to every company? If we manufacture and sell COTS items only, are we required to meet the standards? So it does apply to every company that has these DFARS clauses in their contracts. So, when you sign a contract with the Department of Defense, or you're a subcontractor to somebody that has that contract, right? Because these requirements flow down to those who sign subcontracts with the suppliers. So if you've got these DFARS clauses in your contract, then you're required to meet the standard. Now, if you sell only COTS, which is commercial off-the-shelf products, you're most likely just level 1, where you've got those 15 requirements that you have to have in place to secure federal contract information. And then only if you receive the controlled unclassified information do you have the additional controls, and then only if you receive controlled unclassified information in certain categories will you be in level 3. So it's a graduated scale, if you will. So number 5, is it best practice to call out not only the control mapping, but the assessment objective directly in the policy? Does it need to be that granular? In the policy level, it may not be. You may not have to call out each assessment objective. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the assessment objectives are what most people call those determine if statements. That's what the assessor is going to basically test you on in that particular control. It's determine if the organization does this, determine if the organization does that. But you will want those determine if statements covered really in your implementation, right? This is how we do this policy, right? This is how we've implemented this policy. And then those things will be a little more granular. And then you'll need the evidence that backs those things up as well. So is the only difference between CMMC level 1 and level 2 the outside audit? Not really. So CMMC level 1 has much fewer requirements. It's 15 requirements versus 110 controls that you have to have implemented. And then it's the outside audit. So it's a much, level 2 requires a lot more controls in place than level 1, as well as that third-party audit. All right, everybody. Well, I think that concludes our session for today. I want to thank you all for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see you at another session later on. Take care.